One of the things growing up in the part of New York I grew up in, people think of New York, they think city, right? Concrete buildings. But the area I grew up in, and a lot of New York, West and Central New York, is an area where a lot of vineyards are, and grapes grow really, really well. So some of you might not know about growing grapes. You might, a few people in the room might like wine, the end product. But the growing, it was interesting. It was nothing to see driving down a road to just see miles and miles of grapevines and vineyard just in rows. And if you've ever seen them, you maybe have that picture in your head, these leafy green vines that just grow in grapevines for vineyards. Jesus is talking about those today. He's using them as an analogy because Israel was a big wine producer for the Roman Empire. Grapes grow really well in the Holy Land. And so one of the big products, the big agricultural products of Jesus' time from Israel was grapes and wine. And so most people would have been familiar with seeing vineyards just in Israel as they traveled, as they moved around, went places, they would have seen them. Just like, it wasn't uncommon where I grew up to just be driving and see a vineyard. So he's using the grapevine as an analogy for the relationship between the Father himself and us. And he says the Father is the one who cares for the vine. He's the vine, and we're the branches. So the vine is like you think about the tree trunk. If you're growing grapes, the vine is the trunk. And then the branches are everything that shoot off the vine. I want to just touch on one part of what he said about pruning, because pruning is a really, really important part of growing grapes. He says, every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. And so pruning is something that is part of our life. Now, we might not initially see how that applies, but I think there are times when I equate pruning with change. There might be other ways that pruning happens in our life, but there are times when change comes to us that maybe we didn't ask for, or maybe that just seems right, that God is leading it, and it shakes up our routine. And pruning in the grapevine shakes it up, changes its appearance, changes its look, changes how it acts for a while. And when Jesus talks about pruning, he's talking about the Father, the vine dresser, prunes in the lives of his faithful, prunes so that they bear more fruit. So I want to say a few things about pruning, 3 things about pruning, and then a question for us to reflect on as we think about what does that look like? That's an abstract analogy. What does that maybe look like in our life? And so the first thing I want to say is just for everyone to hear, pruning happens to good branches. Pruning happens to good branches, right? Not bad branches. Bad branches get removed. Jesus says that just like a vine dresser is going to, branches that are blocking, kind of tangling around good branches, they're going to be removed. Good branches, branches that are already bearing fruit, get pruned. So God's activity in our life might be pruning or changing things in order for us to bear more fruit. It does not mean that we're bad. It doesn't mean that we're being punished. It doesn't mean that God is angry with us. It means that good branches get pruned, and pruning requires some change. So we love to live routine, comfortable routine. It's just kind of how we set up our lives to be. And there are times when that gets completely thrown off, out of whack, situations outside of our control. Pruning requires some change. And so there are times in our life where God's going to push us into change, maybe more than we would like to be pushed. Pruning happens to good branches. It's not that you're doing something wrong. Pruning happens to good branches. The second thing is pruning happens to good branches because pruning is done with the idea that the branches will bear more fruit. And so the vine dresser, and Jesus says that's our Father in heaven, the vine dresser is always shaping in us, shaping our hearts, shaping our lives that we bear more fruit. For him, that is to look more and more like Jesus, to have a heart like Jesus, to have a character like Jesus, to have a disposition. I know some of us, myself included, are not even close to that. But the patience of the Father, always just making slight prunes here and there to get us to that place. Sometimes, I believe, these changes might feel painful, or we might not understand them, because our goals and the Father's goal might be different. Now, this is a hard thing to admit. It's a little convicting. So I'm going to be honest. There are times in my life where I think I lose track of that goal, and my goal becomes something else. It's not to be like Jesus. It might be to be successful, or to have my family taken care of, or whatever. Not bad goals, but remembering that the Father's goal in his pruning and shaping our hearts and lives is to be more like his Son. And sometimes our goals don't align. That's when I need to adjust mine. And so there's going to be times in our lives when some pruning occurs, some changes occur, some reshaping occurs that doesn't seem to make sense to us in our current goals. This is what I want. Why is this happening? And it's because God is maybe redirecting us to get us back on track. His goal is that we look like his Son, that we have hearts and characters like Jesus, not necessarily what our goals are at that moment. Our goals may be rooted in our own ego. They may be rooted in our pride. They may be rooted in some wound we have, trying to prove someone wrong from our childhood, whatever, right? Those things can be fuel for us, but God's, the Father's goal is always that we look like his Son. So pruning happens to good branches. The Father's design, he prunes us so that we look more and more like Jesus. And then the third thing is pruning is always with future growth in mind. An expert vine dresser knows how to prune with future growth in mind, not the current state of the vine, future growth. And this takes someone who knows what they're doing. Now, I tell stories about my mother a lot. I'm going to tell another one. I love my mother. She's a very humble woman, very humble servant of the Lord in all areas of her life, except oddly one. And I can't figure out why. She thinks she is a master gardener. And she loves to prune like bushes and shrubs and shape them. And here's the truth. She's awful at it. She doesn't know what she's doing. And I love her. And if I thought she could get on YouTube and listen to this, I would be very hesitant in sharing this story. But this is very true. I'm not making this up. Sarah will back me up. My brother and I get frustrated because she will lecture us on how to trim trees and how to do shrubs, and hers look terrible. And she won't see it. She can't see it. And it's really weird because she is such a humble person, except in this one area where it's just she's blinded by pride, and I can't quite figure out why. None of us can. And her view is she can't tolerate cutting anything green off of anything when she prunes, which is thinking about the present, right? So here's a branch, it's green, I can't cut it. So what ends up happening is her shrubs and her bushes and her trees get so overgrown that we have to cut them down because they get too big, they have dead spots, there's parts of them that die because they're blocking sunlight from other ones. They get overgrown in the space. We've had the post office have complaints on her because she had a shrub that literally grew over and swallowed the mailbox, so the postman had to stick his hand in to this giant shrub to deliver her mail. I'm not making any of this up. This is 100% true. And she prunes and trims just thinking about the present, not wanting to cause take anything green off the plant. That's not how a vine dresser prunes a vine. A vine dresser prunes a grapevine thinking about the future. So after the grape harvest, the vine is super green and beautiful, and the grapes are taken off, and the vine dresser cuts it back almost to the vine. The vine dresser knows there's little spots on the branch where new branches are going to come up next year. And so he cuts the branch back to leave only enough room for 2 to come up, because he understands his space. He understands how much room there is. And so for every 1 branch this year, he cuts that branch back so that 2 branches will come out of it next year. But if you've ever seen a grapevine or a vineyard after a pruning, it looks desolate. There's not anything green to be seen. It's just brown, cut to the vine, maybe with 4 inches, little shoots all around. If you had no idea about how this process worked, you would come and think, that guy just destroyed that beautiful, green, vibrant grapevine. But the truth is this: he knows what he's doing, and he understands what it needs for future growth. He's an expert. And so he knows that it's going to go dormant in the winter, and there's going to be a time where it doesn't look like there's a lot of activity. And he knows in the springtime, for every 1 branch there was last year, there's going to be 2 big, leafy, beautiful branches bearing fruit, because he knows what he's doing. Jesus says the Father's like this. He created us. He knows what he's doing. And there's going to be times in our life when we don't understand the changes that are coming, when we don't understand our life and our routines getting rearranged. We don't understand the season we're in, but he knows what he's doing because he's the expert. And his mind is always on future growth, not present comfort. If we thought it's just about making the vine look good and not making changes, the vine would overgrow. The vine dresser knows what the vine needs for future growth, just like the Father knows what we need for future growth. And so some of the things in our life that we don't understand at the moment might be things that are setting us up for future growth to bear fruit. Now, I want to say one thing here. I'm not talking about, there are changes that I feel fit into the category of pruning, and there are some that aren't. All change is not pruning, but I think all pruning requires change. And so I'm not talking about death of a loved one or sickness or things like that. That's not God's pruning. That's life's burdens. I mean, those are things that are, I think, a different category. But you know what I'm talking about. The changes in our life that we didn't ask for. Routines, they might be professional, they might be in relationships, they might be in our family situations. Sometimes going off to college, sending kids off to college is a pruning in a way, for their growth and for ours. Right? The changes in our life that are coming are pruning. We trust the Father. He's an expert. He knows what he's doing. And so Jesus gives us a last piece of advice on how to handle the pruning. Abide in the vine. That's him. Just cling to him. He gets us through the changes and gives us the strength to grow with more fruit. You know, the vine dresser prunes the 1 branch so that next year it would be 2. And the year after that, it would be 4. So he understands what he's doing, that more and more fruit come. So if you're in that situation now where you feel like you're in the middle of a pruning, this would be a good time to abide in the vine. Maybe you don't understand why it's happening. Maybe you're not quite sure why it's happening. But abide in the vine, and he'll give us the strength to bear fruit and to grow. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.